Hi, my name is Alan White, and I am the author of Exponential Groups, Unleashing Your Church's Potential, which is being released on February 1st by Hendrickson Publishers. I grew up in the great state of Kansas, born in Lawrence, so I am a Jayhawk by birth, so Rock Chalk Jayhawk. And spent most of my time in Topeka, went to school in Missouri for my BA and my MDiv, and then spent the next 20 years, nearly 20 years in California, where I served a great church called New Life Christian Center, and then went into the consulting world after being at the church for 15 years. Moved here to Greenville, South Carolina about 10 years ago to work at another great church, Brookwood Church, where I served for 4 years, and then went back into coaching and consulting. So a little bit about the book. The book I wrote mainly is for pastors and for people who champion small groups at their church, whether they're on staff or not. And the reason that I wrote this book, I honestly felt compelled to write this book, whether my mom and dad were the only ones that read it, but I felt like some things needed to be said. And the book comes from a lot of frustration on my part of trying a lot of different methods, some of which didn't work, some of them I couldn't get them to work. And so out of that, learned some new things, invented a few things, just some things we did purely out of necessity. But churches that I worked with across the country have also been a great influence on me, and came up with the thoughts in this book. Publisher gave me some questions that I'm going to attempt to answer in a short period of time. And so here we go. What has made you so passionate about expanding churches' small groups? I think the main thing is that I think small groups meet the vast majority of needs in any church. Whether that need is assimilation and connection, discipleship and growth, serving, giving, outreach, small groups top the bill for all of those things. But I believe the primary purpose of groups is leadership development. And so when you think about it, if someone is to prepare a lesson or prepare a study and lead a group in it, who's going to learn the most, the leader or the group? Well, we all know it's going to be the leader that's going to learn the most because they've had to spend time preparing and they're ready to go. And so the more people that we can enlist in leadership, the more people that we're developing. And so I believe primary purpose is leadership development. But beyond that, all of these other reasons, even if you just choose one of those, is a great reason to do groups in your church. Question number 2, what do you think is the biggest factor hindering churches from successful group making? Honestly and sincerely, I believe the biggest factor is fear. Fear of failure, fear of the unknown, fear of being blamed. I think fear of losing control. I believe the biggest factor is fear of taking a risk, fear of trying something new. And what I discovered in my years, what led me from being stuck with my groups at 30% to getting to a place where I had more people in groups than we had in the church, and I talk about that in the book, the biggest factor that changed was my own thinking. That was the biggest factor. That was the biggest obstacle from where our groups were and to where they went. Number 3, what advice would you give to someone who would like to start a small group but doesn't want to be considered its leader? Don't call them a leader. You can invite people to get together with their friends and do a study, which is an invitation to lead a group, but you don't use the words lead or group. And the reality is, if they can get a group of people together, they are a leader, but maybe they didn't feel like one. And probably the best compliment I was ever paid was a guy at our church, his name is Doug. And he told me one day, he said, "Thank you, Pastor Allen, for showing me that I was the leader I never knew that I was." And in fact, the book is dedicated to all of the Dougs of the world. And so I think, to get people going, and then maybe you introduce some training and some things later, but don't call them a leader, just let them lead. Number 4, what are ways that a church can be creative in its approach to creating groups? If you're talking about the church as an institution, you don't need to be creative. What you need to do is you need to give permission and opportunity to your members and let them be creative. So I've had groups of friends that, met at Starbucks and they would come up to the table and say, well, could we do the study? They were already a group. Could we do the study? Or a guy that he and his wife were already leading a couples group and asked for another set of materials so that he could do the study with the mechanics he worked with at a dealership, and in the break room during lunch. Or a gal that wanted to start a group on a commuter train, or a police officer that wanted to start a group for first responders because they were getting tired of going to other small groups and being asked to bail out somebody's kid, or fix somebody's ticket. And so, if you give permission and opportunity to your people, they will become creative, and they will form groups that you never dreamed of before. Number 5 in chapter 1, you mentioned that a desire for control will hinder the growth of groups. For those who haven't read the book yet, what are some other examples of factors or mental blocks that typically hold groups back from their potential to expand, that you discuss in exponential groups? There are a number of things. For me, it was control. And nobody started a group, nobody led a group unless I knew them. I handpicked them, I recruited them myself, I trained them myself, I coached them myself. And that, because I didn't want any of the problems. And I just thought, we throw this thing wide open, we're going to have all kinds of problems, and I don't need problems. And I began to be challenged by some new ideas, some new thoughts of how to create groups in my church, how to recruit leaders and form groups. And, I'd plead with God. And I'd say, God, I can't do these things because I need quality control. And God said, well, Alan, when you say quality control, quality is your excuse. And I just needed control. And so that's a big factor. I think another big factor are people that they get into the paralysis of analysis. They study, plan, and they keep coming up with, okay, there's gaps, and this isn't perfect, and we need to perfect this, we need to have a better strategy so we don't get into all of these problems. And the reality is, you just need to do something. You just need to try something. We don't have this luxury of time that we can just sit back and study this thing forever. The Bible tells us over and over again, time is short. So we need to do something. And, take a risk. Make a mistake. We learn from our mistakes. We don't learn from our successes. We learn from our mistakes. So make some mistakes. Learn some things. Learn from my mistakes. Read the book. There we go. But anyway, but you don't have to be a colossal failure. I mean, try something with a handful of groups. Start something, a new way of doing groups. Start that with 5 groups. And then if it works, then expand that to more. If there's a problem with it, then you can contain the problem. Sometimes experiments succeed and invent wonderful things. Sometimes experiments blow up, but if this pilot blows up, you can contain that pretty well. But I would say, do something. Take a risk. Decide what the acceptable level of risk is for your church and move forward. Number 6 here, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received about groups? My friend Brett Eastman, who has Life Together Ministries, told me once, he said, let the exceptions be the exceptions. Sometimes we plan entire systems based on the exceptions. So if you say, okay, we're going to form these groups, we want you to invite people that you know, invite people from church and fill up your group, and then we think, oh, what if there's somebody new to the church and new to the area and they don't know anybody and they don't get invited? Well, suddenly we'll take this great idea of people leveraging their existing relationships in order to form what turn out to be better groups, but we'll scrap that because we have to create some system with maybe some lame sign-up card or website or something, which doesn't work very well at all, and in my humble opinion. But anyway, we'll scrap a whole thing. That what will work for the majority, we'll scrap that in order to cater to these exceptions. So let the exceptions be the exceptions. Launch something that's going to work by and large for most people. And then find some kind of contingency plan for people that may get left out, because we don't want to leave anybody out. We're pastors. We don't want to leave anybody out. But there are ways to do that. But let the exceptions be the exceptions. Number 7, what's a sticky situation or failed plan that you've learned from? There's so many. But I have learned. That's the key. And then I wrote a book. I didn't think about things and then write a book. I actually did it and then wrote a book. Well, here's an example. We had people fill out a little application if they wanted to host a group in their home. We were using that language at the time. And the last question was something to the effect of, is there anything going on in your life that would cause harm to the church or the cause of Christ? And thinking that that blanket statement would cover pretty much everything. and had a couple that signed up to lead a group and said no, absolutely not, and come to find out they were living together, they weren't married, and they didn't regard to have what we call shacking up. They didn't regard that as being cause for concern, and so we really had to reevaluate how we asked that question, and to say what are the things that are going to detract from leadership? What are the things without creating this whole laundry list, because we weren't like, I mean, there's no perfect people. I mean, if God wanted perfect people, we wouldn't be using any of us, would he? But on the other hand, it was a matter of how do we spell this out so that we address the primary needs in a person's life. They're going through separation, they're going through divorce, they're dealing with a life controlling problem. They're having sex with somebody they're not married to. I mean, these kinds of things. And so we had to rephrase the whole thing and give a little more detail, because as we were reaching people more and more in our community that had less of a Christian background, we had to explain to them kind of what was going to go and what wasn't. And that was a huge learning from that. And like I said, there's so many other learnings. What projects are you working on now or have planned in the future? I've been working the last year with Mariners Church on Rooted, which is an experience that they brought over from Kenya. It's a discipleship method. It's more of a holistic discipleship method that goes all the way back to the first century church, the Moravians, to the Celts, to the early Wesleyans. And I like it because it's a very well-rounded approach to discipleship. So it's called Rooted. The other thing I'm working on is with a guy named Rick Rusaw, who's the author of the Externally Focused Church, and then now the Neighboring Church. He's written several other books. But looking at neighboring as being an extension or being the next gen of what we call missional, and developing a lot of resources to go along, training materials to go along with neighboring. Personally, I have some online courses I'm working on. I have one that's out called Leading an Exponential Group Launch. I have another one that I'm working on called Coaching Exponential Groups, because coaching's been abandoned by so many churches, so many prominent churches in the U.S., and I just feel like it's a big, big mistake that you need coaching in order to grow your small groups. I have a book kind of in the works about discipleship. It's more of a holistic approach to discipleship. I'm not sure what the timing on that one's going to be, but I've really been struck by a line in the Great Commission where Jesus says, "And teach them to obey all that I've commanded you." And I think we missed something. I think we teach all that Jesus commanded us. I don't know that we teach people to obey. And so, a lot of our discipleship is a neck up thing. And we're not we're not actively doing things. We're not physically involved. And this is a blanket statement, but you know where things are with you. And we train people on things that we can measure: how many verses they memorized, how many books of the Bible that they've read, how much time they've spent in prayer, those kinds of things. But how do we measure the change in attitude, the change in behavior, forsaking bad habits and taking on good habits, changing our attitude toward people who are different from us? And so that's kind of where I will hit with this next book. So that's all of the questions they gave me. They didn't tell me how to end the interview, so I'll just say bye. No. Pick up a copy of Exponential Groups, and I would appreciate it. But I think that this is going to challenge you a little bit. For some of you, you're going to get all excited about this. For some of you, this is going to scare you to death. But if you get into this and you get in the weeds, go to my website. Here's my website, alanwhite.org, and contact me. And I will walk you through this and help you to get to places that you've never been with groups. All right, God bless.